This Choircast podcast is brought to you by my book, Inking Christ, a theological approach to tattoos. This book has everything you could ask for. It even has pictures. But what it does, and hopefully you as the reader will find out, is that it opens a new world for us to see how Christ can act within culture immediately and without reservation. So I hope you check it out. Thanks.
Liminal. A word 1,000 miles wide but small enough to fit into the present moment. It describes an in-between place. We live most of our lives within this space, not quite ever arriving at our idealistic final destination. We spend so much of our energies on our best impersonation of who we wish we were, until we can't. But in sneaks a dark night of the soul, or perhaps a mystical experience. Our way of being has an error loop introduced. Today we call that deconstruction. Welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast, where we teach you how to be here, how to traverse these spaces, and where we can go if we remain humble, open, and honest. Well, welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast, where we explore those thresholds of faith, spirituality, and the human experience. I'm your curator of conversations, Tom Rundell. I'm currently out on vacation, and we are re-airing some of my most favorite episodes from last season. And today we're excited to bring you another special recast episode as a part of that August recast series. In today's episode, I had the privilege of speaking with Khang, an insightful author and passionate advocate for social justice. Kathy's story is one of transformation and empowerment, deeply rooted in her love for Jesus and her rich experience as a Korean immigrant in America. She offers a perspective that challenges us to see beyond our own limited viewpoints and to embrace the complexities of identity and spirituality. Kathy is a mother of 3, a wife, a writer, a speaker, and a yoga teacher. Her journey has taken her from childhood diaries to newsrooms, and she has co-authored several impactful books. Her latest work that we talked about, Moving Disagreement, co-authored with Matt Michelados, explores how to sustain community in a polarized society, and has been recognized as one of the most anticipated books of 2023 by Englewood Book Review. So it got some accolades when we were talking about this. Additionally, Kathy co-hosts a fascinating podcast, now in its 11th season. With over 2 decades of experience in parachurch ministry, Kathy has worked extensively with college kids and leaders, encouraging them to find and use their voices to bring about positive change. Her recent book, Raise Your Voice, Why We Stay Silent, and How to Speak Up, is a call to action for everyone to embrace their influence and work towards a more just and compassionate world. In this conversation, Kathy and I delve into her spiritual roots in the Korean church in Chicago, the complexities of renting church spaces from white church folks, and the false hospitality that can arise in those spaces, and the need to rethink what true hospitality means within the church. We discuss her book, Loving Disagreement, and explore the concept of love beyond mere niceness, addressing that toxic positivity that seems to have infected a lot of our church spaces. Kathy also shares her thoughts on the misuse of apostolic authority to create exclusive dogmas and what loving one's enemy truly looks like. Her insights are challenging and they are inspiring, offering a fresh perspective on faith and community. Now, this episode is a beautiful and honest exploration of identity, spirituality, and the power of using your voice for positive transformation and change. Whether you're hearing it for the first time or revisiting this one, I hope Kathy's journey resonates with you as much as it did for me. So without further ado, let's dive into this recast episode with Khang. Well, Kathy, welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast. It's so good to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much.
Now, you're one of the voices that I've been following for a couple years on Facebook. And so here's a little confession moment. A few years ago, I was like in this book writing zone. It's been placed on hold for other reasons, but I was in a book writing zone. And so I was friending as many authors as I could. And I was like, I need to be in this group of people. And you were one of the authors that kind of came to the forefront, and your voice on social media has been one that's helped me in my deconstruction, reconstruction journey. So this is our first time ever like speaking and talking, but I've been following you for a while. So I appreciate to have this opportunity.
Oh my goodness, thank you. I was a little worried. I was like, what did you see?
I was telling you before that that's the way I feel about the 2015 episodes of my podcast. I'm like, what did I say? I don't know. I don't remember what I said. But now before we dive into who you are and what you do and just how you see things, you mentioned on your author's page that you are a coffee lover, and as a
Yes.
fellow coffee lover, I can't drink the Folgers and the Taster's Choice, and I even tried Tim Hortons. And I'm like, nope, that's just Folgers in a red can. I can't do it. So I want to know. Can you tell us, like, what is your favorite coffee experience and what made that so memorable? Is it someone you had coffee with? Is it a place that you had coffee at? Or is it just the most amazing cup of coffee you've ever had in your life? You can choose any way to take that one.
That was such a great question. And I really had to think about this. So I can't tell you how long it was, how long ago. It probably was more than 20 years ago. And I believe I was out in Seattle visiting my college best friend. And she had taken me to a cafe. And at that point, I had never had anything other than just straight up coffee. And she had taken me and said, "Oh, they have really good lattes here." I was like, "I don't know what a latte is." Sure. And I remember getting this, it looked like a mug, a soup bowl, maybe,
Oh, yeah.
with this. Like, I was like, "What is this?" I don't know what this is. And it's that foam and the steamed milk and the espresso in there. And I just remember thinking, what is this? And ever since then, it has been just a love affair with coffee. I am unlike you, Tom. I can
Okay.
drink anything.
You can drink any coffee.
I can drink any coffee. It is usually about expediency when I'm traveling. So I carry the little packets of freeze-dried coffee. Bustela is my favorite. And I don't want to have to like use the little coffee maker in the hotel room. I don't want to have to like leave my room to get my first cup of coffee. I want my coffee there. But at home, my coffee is intentional and slow. So I have an espresso maker. I actually pull 2 shots every morning.
Nice. A
It's very
double.
slow. Yes, it is a double. No sugar, no cream, unless I'm making myself a latte to remind myself of that first time where I was like, oh, so there's more to this coffee thing than just sugar and cream.
Oh, wow. Now, when you pour those 2 shots, are you just drinking espresso in the morning, or do you like Americano, the thing with hot water?
Usually it's Americano with hot water, but if I'm feeling like I can take it slow in the morning and I don't have to rush off, I will sit down with the double shot and just sip my
You
espresso.
are very brave. I learned the story behind the Americano when I did a lot of work at a coffee house, and my friend would always drink the Americano, and he said that it came from World War II when the American soldiers went over to Italy and asked for coffee. They gave them espresso, and they said,
Right.
"Oh my gosh, can you please water this down?" And they put hot water
Yeah.
in it. So every time they see a soldier, they would say, "Give them the Americano," because
That sounds about right.
that
Yeah.
stuff is thick. My
It
goodness.
is. It
But it's
is.
good. It's good. I have had espresso in Guatemala, and it's in a little tiny cup, and you're just enjoying it.
It's so good. And that crema on top, the oils, it's just so
Yeah.
yummy.
I mean, I could talk about that for another 20 minutes, but I think we have some more important things to dive into. And I was wondering if you could just give us a picture of who you are and your roots and kind of the soil that you grew out of.
Mm. So, I am a Korean American. I am an immigrant, the child of immigrants, and grew up in the immigrant church. So I grew up in the Korean immigrant church in Chicagoland, very Midwest. And it was back in a time pre K-pop, pre K-dramas, pre seeing stadiums full of people of all races and ethnicities singing along in my mother tongue. And I would say that is the soil that my spirit was planted in. And my parents were very intentional about reminding me that there was soil on both continents. And so there was this sense of there is a part of me that's still in Korea, and there's a part of me still here in America, which can be a wonderful thing, but also a very disorienting thing.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Have you taken a trip back to that other soil?
I have only been back a few times, and the last time I was back was in college. So it has been a long time since I've been back. But later in this month, I'll be traveling back to Korea with my parents and my oldest child. And that will be her first time. It'll be the first time for any of our children, actually, to go back. And so I'm really looking forward to that. It's been about 30 years, maybe more than that, since I was last in Korea. So much has changed over there and over here, and so much has changed in me. So I'm really looking forward to that trip.
I'm looking forward to a book that might come out of that trip and what you learn along the way.
Yes.
You said you grew up in the Korean immigrant church. What did that look like? What did that feel like? What kind of faith did you find there?
It was so much a part of both faith and culture that it's hard to separate, and I don't think I need to. So it was learning hymns and the Lord's Prayer in Korean before I learned any of those things in English. So I still have hymns where when I sing them in English, it takes me a minute to figure out, oh, I know this. I know this
Ah,
in a different language. And it also meant having a place every Sunday to go back to that felt very much like my home. So the smells were familiar, the sounds were familiar, the faces were familiar. And it was this faith that didn't divide me from being, American and Korean. It felt very much like, oh, I'm using both languages. I'm playing around with kids who are speaking both English and Korean. But this is the one place where I felt like, oh, people here get me. They understand my parents. They understand me. And we eat and share a lot of the same kind of immigrant displaced stories of finding home in a building and in a land that isn't ours. So that also meant the churches that I grew up in, the physical buildings were not always our buildings. They were often rented from, predominantly white established congregations. And so I understand what it means to know that church isn't a building because it's not yours. You are a guest in that space. And yet the faith was not a place of being a visitor. That faith was very much where I belonged.
that is an interesting thing I haven't thought of before. Here I am, a pastor, and we have a building that was built in 1872. And we've been in this building since then. I mean, as a congregation, we
Wow.
physically own the building, the plot of land that's in all of the historical pictures of the town. You go to the library down the street and you see it. And there's this sense of, we're congregational, so we call it the meeting house. We don't call it the church.
Okay.
Because we want to make sure that we separate out what the church is and isn't.
Yes.
But there still is that understanding that this is the church,
Right.
the building is the church. And while we try to remember that it's not the church. It seems to be our default. And it seems as though your default is, no, the people are the church, and we're just meeting in this borrowed space in that borrowed building. Do you think that shaped how you see how church like functions and what church is for?
Well, it did in both beautiful and hard ways, because the host church, the people who own the building, my experience as a child growing up was always that we were guests in that building and we were not part of the church. And so it was very much this like, yes, we can have these foods, but we have to make sure that there's no trace of this food and the smell. And how we operated or moved in that space was very much watched because we were renters. And I think I understood very early that if you didn't own the space, you were always a guest. And hospitality looked a certain way in that context. And that is not the kind of hospitality I grew up with in my own home. And so I think my idea of being hospitable and welcoming people into my home is very much shaped by my Korean culture as opposed to my Christian culture, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And but it also showed me and made me think about the ways in which you can be a wonderful host and still have blind spots or places where you cannot understand because you don't ask the questions, because you assume that everybody is operating in the same way. And so, I think I like to ask the questions of congregations that own buildings. What does your hospitality look like when people come in? And when you say all are welcome, what are the strings attached to that welcome?
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of strings attached to that whole all are welcome. We mean two different things when we say that usually. It can be either be you're welcome to come and conform to who we are, or it can mean you're welcome. This is a space where you can be courageously yourself.
Right.
And explore what it means to be you and Christian in our midst.
Yes.
And there's not a lot of the second one. And it seems like there's a whole lot of the first. I actually call that the anchovy paste at the center of the Tootsie Pop.
Oh.
Because, these young families, they got kids and they're wanting the programs and they want, things that are flashy, and they go to these non-denominational, they always call them non-denominational, even though they have denominations.
Right.
But they're contemporized churches with like rock shows and programs. And then they learn their stances on, LGBTQ individuals or women in leadership and they're like, I didn't realize that this was here. And it's like, it tasted sweet on the first thing. And then you finally work your way through to the center of the culture. And it's like, oh, gross. I didn't know that was here.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's interesting too, because they go into those spaces not even thinking to ask questions.
Yeah.
And I would say that has not been my experience when I enter into a space. And I think that comes from being not white and knowing that things could be very different. Not just kind of the Korean or American culture, but like within churches. And so it's always one of the first things we're looking for. Like when we're visiting churches, we will look at the website trying to figure out, they're not going to be clear on their stance on women, pastors, and preaching. They're very unclear about what they believe about our LGBTQ siblings. and that lack of clarity speaks volumes
Mm-hmm.
to someone like me who will ask the direct question. Will you ever invite a woman to your pulpit? Will you marry a gay couple? Things like that. Um, and I'm sure that, 30 years ago, I was somebody who didn't need to ask those questions or didn't think that I needed to ask those questions. But I would say, yeah, in those 30 years, I've become far more pointed
Mm.
in asking pastors, church leaders, congregations to be honest and clear with what they believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, I think that your vantage point from being a renter, from being an immigrant, from being
Mm-hmm.
Korean in white spaces, like that vantage point gives you a perspective that I need to see. I need to hear things that you're asking, hear things that you're saying to help me adjust my perspective to these blind spots that, like, just in this very conversation, I never would have thought. What does hospitality mean when you are the owner of the space? And we're a church that's trying very hard to be hospitable to the community, turning it into a community center. Opening it up to the farmers market and small businesses and teachers of like drivers training, for teenagers and different events that are fun for the community without the strings of, and now you better come to our church. Just
Right.
being open that way. But I never would have seen, this is, we are the owner of this space kind of a thing. And we're just being kind to these people. We're being generous to these people. It's like, what if we viewed our building as the community's building?
Mm-hmm.
And our people are the caretakers of this for the community. So you're helping me like take something that I've been working on and like even like take a couple more steps on. That's why I wanted to talk to you today, because I knew that you would help me see things. Now you've recently co-authored a book called Loving Disagreement.
Yes.
Was there a specific experience or moment that opened your eyes to the need of this book?
Oh, goodness. There were many, many,
A
many,
lifetime of
many.
them?
A lifetime of them.
Is something popping out now?
Yeah, I would say that there were several experiences over the last, I'd say, 20 years of myself and others calling out and calling in, predominantly white male Christian leaders in different spheres, whether they were pastors or publishers or authors or you name it, it's probably happened, where something is said on the pulpit or at a conference or something is published or you name it, that is racist and pokes fun or uses Asians and Asian American people culture as kind of I don't know, the hook or front of the joke, whatever. But and I would say by and large, those multiple experiences showed me that we don't actually know how to disagree. We don't know how to have a conversation. And we certainly are not showing each other love, even though that is often what is called for on the part of the offender speaking to the one calling out the offense. So I'd say by and large, when I've made something public that I call a racist act, by and large, folks have responded back to me by saying, you should be nicer. You should take into consideration all of the good things that have out of this person's work or what could happen or what they've done in the past. And you should be kind and nice and civil and polite by not doing this on social media. You should approach this person privately. And I realized all of those expectations that were only placed on me and others calling out the offense, as opposed to people going to that person and saying, hey, have you thought about what you posted or what you preached or what you published and how others might perceive that as racist and harmful? And what I realized was, even in all of those experiences, there is a discomfort with disagreement, and there is a discomfort with actually engaging with the hard differences. It's better to just be nice. It's just better to take it offline so people don't see it. And I feel like, that doesn't really work. And there's got to be a better way. So this book actually was brought as an idea to Matt as a book on maybe civility, especially from the last few years. There's been a lot of disagreements publicly, online, in churches, you name it. And Matt brought the idea to me about co-authoring a book, and we both immediately decided that civility was not going to be a high enough bar for Christians. And in part, I can't help but reflect on all of the things that I've experienced in the past, where it's Christians who then, around the discomfort of being called out on racist behavior, then feel like it is completely appropriate to send really awful messages and emails and post comments while they are asking me to take things offline, be nice, and think about the big impact these people have had on the world.
That whole expectation that you're the one expected to be nice and they're the ones that can just continue to be exactly who they are or how they are, the adjustment needs to be on your end, not on their end. You wrote something. Can I read a quote from the book? So you wrote something in the chapter about love, what it is and what is not, that really caught my attention. You said, sometimes when we struggle to love people, we act out of the misunderstanding that love means some kind of direct connection. And we actually move into unloving behaviors like superficiality and avoidance. I am still learning how toxic superficial expressions of love are for true understanding and affection. Got it. Can you say more about that understanding of love is not necessarily being nice and is not necessarily slipping into avoidance and superficiality and just, putting the nice face on things? Can you talk more around that quote that captured my attention?
There is so much in our culture broadly where we are not comfortable with discomfort, and we are not comfortable with people who are grieving. So a lot of what I learned or reflect on around loving isn't around when things are really good, but when things are really hard, and they're going to be hard for a long time. And I think a lot about the times when I've been in deep grief and how I am told to be thankful for the people reaching out and sharing honest to goodness, sincere platitudes. But that's what they are at the end of the day when they are not followed up with something at some point. And I think a lot about that, the last couple of weeks, I've had a number of people around me lose people they love. And what does it mean to really love them in a time of grief? And people I know only online, that's going to look different. But people that I'm in close proximity with, it has to be more than just, hey, I'm really sorry. Let me know what I can do. Right? Love actually takes the risk of doing something that isn't going to receive a thank you right away, but is not about that, right? It's about dropping something off, or I don't know, making sure the newspaper isn't lying there on the driveway for 3 days because they've got other things that they need to deal with. And I think that some of the danger around Christianity is that we just are supposed to be nice. And so we're taught, to say things, and we're also taught if you say them enough, maybe you'll believe it and maybe you'll do something. And quite frankly, there was a season where every white Christian woman was like buying up different signs to hang in their walls about, this family is about love, and, or I'm blessed, and all of these like happy, toxic sayings that actually don't allow us to sit with the hard part about love, which is love endures. And enduring, that's not a fun word. I like think of marathon runners, like they endure the training, they endure. Or I think of friends who are in chemo, they are enduring. This isn't to like, oh, I'm blessed because I have a nice warm blanket. It's, I have to endure. And so I think that's where I'm still struggling and wrestling with that there are so many things that we are conditioned to say as Christians, but do we really mean it? And do we do that? Like, I'll be praying for you. How many times have I said that? And I'm not actually praying for that person in any consistent sort of manner that would bring them up to my thoughts to compel me to a different expression of love. And so I know this sounds awful, but I try to stop saying that.
Yeah.
Because I don't know what that does for you or me.
Right. Yeah, it's almost as though like we have that culture of toxic positivity that we have to maintain that insulates us from the reality of the harshness and suffering of life until tragedy hits. And now when that one individual is in the toxic positivity group, but they're the one that can't maintain it, they then create anxiety for the group that has to be dealt with. And so here come the platitudes and here come the signs. And it's just, it shows us the discomfort we have with discomfort. And, you mentioning, hey, this thing you said, wrote, published is racist. You're entering into that toxic positivity circle as someone who was wounded and saying, by the way, I wasn't blessed here,
Yeah, that's right.
You're bringing the harshness of reality to something. And I've noticed that we just have a hard time with that as like evangelical culture in general. We have a hard time with reality. I don't know why.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's so strange too, because there's such a heavy focus on, we're sinners and we need redemption. And yet when sin is called out, oh, no. Don't look at that. Look at all the other good things. Divert attention to the happy stuff. And it kind of goes back to that sense of knowing that the building that our church met at was asking us into a certain kind of agreement. And I am asking myself and other Christians, can we break and create a new agreement in how we enter into hospitable spaces, how we create those, how we enter into disagreement, how we invite each other to be better.
Yeah.
And not just better, like, oh, we should be nicer, but like to be better at failing and make that normal because we're human. And I think that that's the hardest part, is when I or others call attention to sexism, racism, my own ableism, as I was realizing, using the phrase blind spot, right? Like things like that, where because we've been so focused on being right and being nice, that we miss opportunities to be human, to be wrong, and learn to do better, not just for ourselves, but for others, so that we don't keep pushing people to the margins. Because I can do that. I can still do that as I reflect on my words and my actions, going, oh, that's a phrase that I just use without thinking about it and what the implications are. That that is an invitation, not to focus on, oh, I'm so bad, I failed, but like, oh, I hate to think that any of your listeners would hear this and then feel like, I don't belong in this conversation.
Yeah. I like that. Learning in public, being wrong in public, and correcting yourself in public. That's a practice I'm new to from Matt Tebbe, where he says a lot of very bold things on social media, and they sting. I told them that. I was like, your words sting so bad. But it's in a way that I need it to sting, because it shows me where the cuts are. When you put that cleaner on your hand, you're like, oh, there's the spot. That's what it's like. And he said, I'm doing that for me. And I'm trying to learn in public and when I'm wrong in public, to correct myself in public. And he says that he had this fear of needing to be 100% right before anything was said, that he had to overcome. And I was like, oh, there you go again, stinging me again.
Yeah.
I have that. Now, there's something that you said. Can I read another quote from the book?
Yeah.
There's something that you said that, you're talking about, birthright citizens versus, being an immigrant, renting the facility, not being fully at home. But you said, I've heard a lot of talk about who is and isn't a Christian, and that actually still angers me, because it sounds a lot like that language I hear from birthright citizens who consider themselves true, quote unquote, Americans. I carried around a green card for decades, and that definitely shaped my understanding of belonging, citizenship, and civic duty, and how Christians are supposed to engage in the world and culture around us. Can you talk more about that sense of belonging versus that sense of entitlement from birthright citizens, and how it applies to this Western Christian context? Like, what have you noticed and seen?
I have noticed that, both in my U.S. citizenship as a naturalized citizen, that process is, there's just a lot of hoops. And I had a pretty clear roadmap to that. And it's expensive. It takes time. You have to study. There are 2 tests. And there is this ceremony that is both beautiful and really bittersweet and strange, where you're pledging allegiance, and it's very, flags waving. And it's this effort to show that you belong and that you will jump through these hoops. And I find it so interesting that in a faith that we're always telling people, come as you are, and our doors are welcome to anyone, that we actually have so many hoops for people to jump through. And those hoops change and shift. It's like the finish line is being moved willy-nilly. And you see that in the history of the church, capital C. And you see that in the history of any denomination and local church, right? What are the requirements for membership, and where was the church? Who can be a member? Well, who can live in that community?
Oh, wow.
Right? Right. So it goes beyond just the rules, but also goes into the culture of who gets to be where and then what spaces are available to them. And, the last couple of years have been so fascinating where people have been able to say, oh, yeah, Donald Trump is a Christian because he says he is. So it's okay to vote for him because he says he's a Christian. And yet I see actual Christians being, canceled by conservative spaces and voices because they've chosen to believe a love and a theology that is more inclusive. So, long rambling answer to your question, that sense of belonging, the goalposts are always shifting for those of us who are not in the room to write the rules.
Hmm.
And so my path to citizenship has changed. It was only open up in the 60s, but then also changed, and sense of belonging and stability changed when there were certain states threatening to ask people for papers. As a naturalized US citizen, I am legally not supposed to be making copies of my citizenship paper. So what paper do I have to show if somebody assumes that because I look the way I do and my name is what it is, that I am not a US citizen? And I think that those are the types of things that the church is actually copying. Kind of like, you have to believe these 4 things in order for you to be a Christian. Oh, and then we forgot to add this other thing. And, oh, now we have this, don't smoke, don't drink, don't dance. Oh, yeah, but you absolutely cannot listen to this kind of music. And you can't listen to this music if it has a drum. like it goes on and on and on.
Yeah, and I've kind of studied like those hot topics over the years and how we came to have like those positions and stances on things, which is so boring to me to have stances on things, but I like to have relationships with people instead of stances on things, Yeah. And it does change because the people writing the rule book, what's important to them now? Well, it's these things now. And so we're going to push these down everyone's throats. And it's like they keep moving and shifting what is considered dogma and taking like this apostolic authority, which is absolutely heretical. But we can't say that because they're the ones who hold the keys of who's coming in and who's going out.
Oh, Tom, if you only knew how close that sentence hits home right now, knowing that people who have read Loving Disagreement have called certain things close to heresy. And I am sitting here kind of baffled by that language from people who maybe don't understand what they're saying because they're so used to being able to say whatever they want without being called into accountability. And so I don't know. I'm hoping that this book is good conversation fodder, first amongst people readers agree with as a way of self-reflection, and then not as a weapon to, pound other people's heads with, but as an invitation to say, oh, how have I, as I have shifted in my theology, not been loving, not shown the fruit of the Spirit in the way I respond to people with whom I shared communion with 5-10 years ago.
Yeah. And the challenge rests with me also to, as a former fundamentalist, to love current fundamentalists
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard for me.
Mm-hmm.
It is
Oh,
really
it's hard
hard.
for me.
Gosh, it's hard. And the people who have the keys, loving, how do we love them in a way that doesn't enable them to keep doing
Right.
it? This is what the book is about.
Right.
Using your voice, calling people out and saying, this isn't loving, and I'm loving you by telling you that this isn't loving. But they don't
Right.
experience that as love. They experience that as challenge.
Yes. Yes. And it's hard because, tables turned. That's how we would respond as well.
Yeah.
And so it's a challenge for me too, Tom. And sometimes the most loving thing I can do, and I say this, I write this in the book, that for people of color, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is take yourself out of the equation. That you do not have to have a physical kind of in-person conversations, relationship, especially in these times where there are so many policies happening within the church and in our country that are dangerous to people of color and marginalized communities. It's dangerous. And so the most loving thing you can do is kind of extract yourself and allow those who have less personal loss at risk to enter into those spaces and carry the fight.
Yeah, that's a good challenge. I know you got to run, but I have just one more question I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
As you're writing this book, what surprised you most? Maybe something you learned about the topic you're writing about, or something you learned about yourself?
So this is not the first co-authored book I have worked on. Almost 20 years ago was a book called More Than Serving Tea, written with a community of Asian American women. But it was before the technology we have now. And I found this book, Writing with Matt, was so good and hard and hopeful for me. Writing can be a very solitary thing. You kind of go into your corner and you do your thing, and your family is like, okay, they're in writing mode, leave them alone. And then maybe a year later, the book comes out. You've kind of forgotten what you've written. And so to have a writing partner to really do what we read about in scripture, iron sharpening iron, is literally what was happening with Matt. We would send each other portions of what we were working on and get feedback. There's the back and forth that we do at the end of every chapter. And even that experience was very good and hard to try to have a dialogue in written form. So it was challenging and great in so many ways in the craft of writing, but also just as people to commit to something that we knew runs the risk of having folks throw our quotes back at us and ask us, like, how have you been learning about this? I think that's the hardest thing about writing a book, is that your words are out there for other people, not only to learn from, but, I hope not weaponize, but to invite both me and Matt back into this kind of community and this kind of disagreeing.
Well, the book comes out October 17th, so it's available for pre-order, I'm assuming?
Yes, it is. Everywhere that books are sold, including your local bookstore.
That is the favored one, if they still exist.
I know.
They're a dying thing right now, unfortunately. Well, thank you so much for your voice. Thank you for who you are, and thank you for writing this book. And I pray it does everything that you hoped it would do in this world.
Thank you, Tom.
And that brings us to the end of our recast episode with Kathy Khang. I hope you found this conversation helpful, enlightening, inspiring. Kathy's dedication to advocating for social justice and her thoughtful reflections on faith and identity really provide valuable insights for us all striving to make a difference in our communities. If you are moved by this episode and you are inspired by this episode, please consider sharing it with friends, family, community. Kathy's story is a testament to the power of using our voices to bring about positive change and to embrace the complexities of our identities. And so, as always, thank you so much for tuning in to the Liminal Living Podcast. Stay with us throughout this August for more recast episodes, each featuring a new introduction and outro to kind of deepen our engagement with it. So until next time, I am Tom Rondell, encouraging you to find your voice and use it within those liminal spaces that you're in to shape a more just and compassionate world. Peace out.